The snow fell in soft, heavy flakes outside Blue Ridge Brew, blanketing Asheville's cobblestone streets in a quiet hush. It was February 1970, and the small diner glowed like a beacon in the gray morning, its neon sign flickering faintly against the storm. Inside, the air smelled of fresh coffee, sizzling bacon, and the sweet tang of homemade apple pie cooling on the counter. The jukebox in the corner played a gentle folk tune, Joan Baez's voice weaving through the clatter of plates and the hum of conversation. James Carter stood at the counter, his hands stuffed into the pockets of his wool coat, waiting for his usual order, black coffee and a cinnamon roll. At 30, James was a creature of habit, his days structured around his job as a bookkeeper at Henderson's Hardware, a small chain that supplied half the county's lumber and nails. His dark hair was neatly combed, his glasses slightly fogged from the warmth of the diner, and his quiet demeanor blended into the morning crowd. He liked the routine of it all, the predictable rhythm of work, the familiar faces at the diner, the way his small apartment on Patton Avenue stayed tidy, his books alphabetized on the shelf. The bell above the door jingled, sharp and bright, cutting through the diner's warmth. James glanced up, more out of reflex than curiosity, and saw her. She stepped inside, shaking snow from her chestnut hair, her cheeks flushed from the cold. Her green scarf was dusted with flakes, and her brown eyes sparkled with a warmth that seemed to light the room. She wore a simple navy coat, but there was something about her, a quiet confidence, a kindness in the way she smiled at the waitress, then at old Mr. Grayson, who was grumbling about his eggs being too runny. "Good morning," she said to the room, her voice clear and warm like a melody. She caught James's eye as she approached the counter, standing just behind him. "Looks like the snow's not letting up anytime soon." James froze, his usual shyness locking his tongue. He wasn't one for small talk, especially not with women, and certainly not with someone whose smile made his chest tighten. But her tone was so easy, so unassuming, that he found himself turning to face her. "Yeah," he managed, adjusting his glasses. "Makes the walk to work a bit of a challenge." She laughed, a soft sound that reminded him of wind chimes. "Tell me about it. I nearly slipped twice on Biltmore Avenue." She extended a gloved hand. "I'm Clara Evans." "James Carter," he replied, shaking her hand. Her grip was firm, warm through the wool, and for a moment he forgot the cold outside. "You new around here?" "Fairly," she said, her smile unwavering. "Moved to Asheville a few months ago. I teach kindergarten over at Hillcrest Elementary." The waitress slid James's coffee and cinnamon roll across the counter, but he barely noticed. "Kindergarten? That's brave. I can barely handle numbers, let alone a room full of kids." Clara's eyes crinkled with amusement. "Oh, it's not so bad. They're honest, you know. If they don't like something, they'll tell you straight. Makes it easier to figure out what they need." James nodded, unsure what to say next. The line moved, and Clara stepped up to order a tea and a blueberry muffin. As she paid, she glanced back at him. "Nice meeting you, James. Stay warm out." "There. You too," he said, his voice catching slightly. She smiled again, then headed to a booth near the window, where she pulled out a small notebook and began jotting something down, her expression focused, but serene. James left the diner that morning with his coffee cooling in his hand, his mind replaying the brief exchange. Clara Evans. There was something about her, something beyond her kind eyes or the way she seemed to make everyone in the diner feel seen. He couldn't shake the feeling that he needed to see her again. For the next week, James became a fixture at Blue Ridge Brew, arriving earlier than usual, lingering longer than necessary. He told himself it was just the coffee, but Tom Reynolds, his best friend and a mechanic with a knack for seeing through people, wasn't fooled. "You're mooning over someone," Tom said one evening as they sat in James's apartment, a jazz record spinning softly on the turntable. "Don't deny it. You've been to that diner every day this week." James flushed, pushing his glasses up his nose. "I like their cinnamon rolls." "Sure you do." Tom grinned, cracking open a bottle of soda. "Who is she?" James hesitated, then gave in. "Her name's Clara. She's a teacher. We talked for I don't know, a minute. But she's different. Easy to talk to. Then ask her out, you dope, Tom said, leaning back in his chair. What's the worst that could happen? She could say no, James muttered, but the thought of not seeing her again felt worse. He decided to try his luck. On the 8th day, Clara returned to the diner. She wore a red sweater that made her chestnut hair glow under the fluorescent lights, and when she saw James at the counter, her face lit up. Fancy seeing you here again, she said, sliding into line beside him. I'm predictable, James admitted, his heart pounding. Same coffee, same roll. You? Tea and a muffin. Creatures of habit, aren't we? She tilted her head, her eyes teasing but kind. They chatted about the weather, the diner's pie selection, and the upcoming folk festival downtown. When Clara's order arrived, James took a deep breath, his palms sweaty. Clara, I was wondering, would you like to have dinner with me this weekend? There's a place, Bella Vita, on Walnut Street. Italian. Supposed to be good. Clara's smile widened, and for a moment, James thought his heart might stop. I thought you'd never ask, she said. Saturday at 7? 7, he repeated, grinning like a fool. I'll meet you there. Saturday evening, James arrived at Bella Vita 15 minutes early, his tie slightly crooked from nervous adjustments in the restaurant's window reflection. The small Italian place was cozy, with checkered tablecloths and candles flickering in red glass holders. When Clara walked in, wearing a simple green dress that matched her eyes, James forgot how to breathe. She looked elegant, but unpretentious, her hair swept back, a silver necklace glinting at her throat. You clean up nice, she said, eyeing his pressed suit as they sat down. You too, he replied, then winced at how obvious that sounded. I mean, you look really nice. Clara laughed, and the sound eased his nerves. Over plates of spaghetti carbonara and tiramisu, they talked for hours. James learned that Clara loved folk music, especially Pete Seeger, and that she'd hiked half the trails in the Blue Ridge Mountains since moving to Asheville. She spoke passionately about her students, describing how she made papier-mâché planets to teach them about the solar system, or stayed late to help a shy boy with his letters. I want them to love learning, she said, her fork pausing over her plate. Every kid deserves that spark, you know? James nodded, captivated. You're good at it, I can tell. The way you talk about them, it's like they're your own. Clara's smile faltered for a split second, a flicker of something unreadable in her eyes. Then it was gone, and she was asking about his work, his hobbies. James admitted his love for jazz. Miles Davis was his favorite, and his quirky habit of collecting vintage coins. To his surprise, Clara didn't laugh. She asked about rare pennies and whether he'd ever found a 1943 bronze cent, her curiosity genuine. I've never met anyone so easy to talk to, James told Tom the next day, still buzzing from the date. It's like I've known her my whole life. Tom clapped him on the shoulder. Sounds like you're in trouble, buddy. The good kind. Their courtship unfolded like a folk song, steady and sweet, with moments that lingered in James's memory. They took walks in the Blue Ridge Mountains, Clara pointing out wildflowers while James carried a picnic basket. They spent evenings at the diner, sharing pie and debating whether Agatha Christie or Dashiell Hammett wrote better mysteries. Clara's classroom became a topic of endless stories. She'd turned a corner of it into a reading nook, with cushions and fairy lights, and her students adored her. James admired her dedication, the way she spent her own money on books for kids whose parents couldn't afford them. By their 5th date, James knew Clara was special. She listened when he talked about his dream of starting his own accounting firm, nodding thoughtfully as he described wanting to help small businesses in Asheville. She didn't tease him about his coin collection, instead asking to see his 1916 Mercury dime, her fingers tracing its edges with care. What struck him most was her patience with her students. One evening as they walked through Pack Square, she told him about a girl in her class who struggled with reading. I made her a special alphabet chart with pictures she likes. Cats and stars, Clara said, her breath visible in the cool air. Today she read a whole sentence without stopping. You should have seen her face. James squeezed her hand. "You're giving her something she'll carry forever." Clara looked away, her expression softening. "I hope so. Every kid deserves a chance to feel capable." 6 months after that snowy morning in the diner, James stood at the counter of Blue Ridge Brew, his heart hammering. The diner was quiet. Just a few regulars sipping coffee. Clara walked in, her scarf bright against her coat, and James took a shaky breath. When she reached the counter, he dropped to one knee, pulling a small velvet box from his pocket. "Clara Evans," he said, his voice steady despite his nerves. "You've made every day better since I met you. Will you marry me?" The diner fell silent. Clara's hand flew to her mouth, her eyes shining. "Yes," she whispered, then louder. "Yes, James." The regulars clapped, Mr. Grayson included, and the waitress slid 2 slices of pie across the counter on the house. They married in August 1970 in a small chapel on Haywood Street, with 50 guests packed into the pews. Clara wore a simple ivory dress, her hair adorned with daisies, and James couldn't stop smiling as she walked down the aisle. They vowed to love, honor, and cherish each other, their hands clasped tightly. After the ceremony, they danced to Pete Seeger's Turn, Turn, Turn in a community hall, surrounded by friends and neighbors. James and Clara settled into a small rented apartment on Merriman Avenue, its walls bare but soon filled with Clara's colorful sketches and James's framed jazz posters. They lived modestly. James's bookkeeping, salary, and Clara's teaching wages didn't stretch far, but they didn't need much. Clara cooked simple meals like chicken casserole or vegetable soup, and they'd sit at their tiny kitchen table planning their future. "We'll have a house someday," Clara said one night, stirring a pot of chili. "With a garden. I want roses." "Then we'll make it happen," James replied, kissing her forehead. Roses and all. Their life together was quiet but rich. They hosted friends for card games, Clara's laughter filling the room as Tom tried to cheat at poker. They hiked the Blue Ridge Parkway, Clara sketching wildflowers while James pointed out constellations. At Hillcrest Elementary, Clara's classroom became a haven, her walls covered in student art, and her desk piled with handmade cards. James's colleagues at Henderson's noticed his new energy, his quiet smiles as he talked about his wife. In 1974, their happiness hit a snag. After 2 years of trying, doctors told them Clara couldn't have children. The news landed like a stone, especially for Clara, who spent days withdrawn, her eyes red from crying. James held her hand across their kitchen table, his voice gentle. "We still have each other," he said, "and you've got a classroom full of kids who think you hung the moon." Clara nodded, forcing a smile. "You're right, I wanted to give you that." "You give me everything," James said, pulling her close. Clara threw herself into teaching with renewed passion, creating lesson plans that turned math into games and reading into adventures. James suggested adoption, but Clara hesitated. "Maybe someday," she said, her tone vague. And James didn't push. He trusted her, even if he didn't understand the shadow that crossed her face. By 1975, they'd saved enough to buy a modest bungalow on Magnolia Lane, a quiet street lined with oak trees. The house was small, 2 bedrooms, a creaky porch, and a backyard overgrown with weeds, but Clara saw potential. "We'll plant roses here," she said, pointing to a sunny patch near the fence, "and maybe tomatoes in the back." James, no gardener, nodded eagerly. "Whatever you want, Clara." They spent weekends transforming the yard, pulling weeds and turning soil. James built a porch swing where they'd sit in the evenings, watching fireflies flicker in the dusk. Their neighbors took to them quickly. Clara baked lemon bars for birthdays, and James helped Mrs. Helen Parker, the elderly widow next door, with her taxes each spring. The couple became a fixture in the community, their door always open for a chat or a slice of Clara's pie. James's career flourished. His attention to detail earned him a promotion to senior bookkeeper, and his boss, Mr. Henderson, called him the steadiest man I know. Clara's reputation grew too. Parents requested her class, knowing she'd find ways to make their children shine. One night, as she cut out paper hearts for her students' Valentine's Day cards, James watched her, his heart full. "You've got a gift," he said. "Those kids are lucky to have you." Clara smiled, but her eyes flickered with something, sadness maybe, or worry. It vanished quickly, and James wondered if he'd imagined it. In the spring of 1973, Clara mentioned a cousin in Atlanta for the first time. "Laura's sick," she said over dinner, her voice casual but her hands fidgeting with her napkin. "I should visit her. She doesn't have anyone else." "Of course," James said, setting down his fork. "How long will you be gone?" "Just a week," Clara replied, already packing a small suitcase. "She's in an apartment downtown, nothing fancy." James drove her to the bus station, the air crisp with early spring. As they said goodbye, Clara hugged him tightly. "I love you," she whispered. "Don't forget that." When she returned, Clara seemed different, quieter, her eyes scanning the street as if expecting someone. She brought James a keychain shaped like a peach. "A gift from Atlanta," she said, but her smile didn't reach her eyes. For a few days, she checked the locks twice before bed and jumped at sudden noises. James noticed but didn't ask, trusting she'd share when she was ready. By the end of the week, the old Clara was back, laughing as they planted daffodils in the yard. The trips to Atlanta became a pattern. Every few years, Clara would mention Laura or family matters, pack her bag, and return with a small gift. A book, a postcard, a bag of Atlanta's famous pecan candy. Each time, she came back slightly withdrawn, her watchfulness fading after a few days. James chalked it up to the stress of travel or concern for her cousin, never pressing for details. Trust, he believed, meant giving her space. The years slipped. By like pages in a well-loved book, each chapter of James and Clara Carter's life in Asheville adding new layers to their story. By the late 1970s, their bungalow on Magnolia Lane had transformed from a fixer-upper into a home that radiated warmth. The backyard, once a tangle of weeds, now bloomed with Clara's roses, deep reds and soft pinks climbing the fence, and a small vegetable patch where tomatoes ripened each summer. The porch swing James had built creaked softly in the evening breeze, a favorite spot for the couple to share coffee and watch the fireflies dance. James, now 38, had taken a leap in 1978, leaving Henderson's Hardware to start his own accounting firm, Carter Financial Services. It was a modest operation, just a small office downtown with a single assistant, but his reputation for meticulousness and honesty drew clients, local shop owners, artists, even a few Biltmore estate vendors. Clara, at 36, continued teaching kindergarten at Hillcrest Elementary, her classroom a riot of color with hand-painted murals and shelves stuffed with books she'd bought herself. Parents across Asheville requested her class, knowing their children would leave her care with a love for learning and a confidence they hadn't had before. Their life wasn't glamorous, but it was full. Sunday mornings meant drives to a small Methodist church on Haywood Street, where they sang hymns and shared pews with neighbors. Evenings often found them hosting friends, Tom Reynolds and his wife Betty, or Mrs. Helen Parker, the widow next door, for potlucks or card games. Clara's lemon bars and apple pies were neighborhood legends, and James's quiet humor kept everyone laughing, especially when he recounted stories of his early bookkeeping days, like the time he accidentally sent a client's tax forms to the wrong address. Yet beneath the surface of their contented life, there were moments that puzzled James. Clara's trips to Atlanta, which had begun in 1973, continued every few years. In 1976, she went again, citing her cousin Laura's ongoing health issues. James drove her to the bus station as he always did, and she returned a week later with a small leather-bound journal as a gift, its pages blank, but its cover embossed with an Atlanta skyline. "For your coin collection notes," she said, her smile bright but her eyes distant. For days after her return, Clara was quieter, her movements careful. She'd pause at the window, glancing down Magnolia Lane as if expecting someone, or check the door locks twice before bed. Once, when a car backfired on the street, she flinched so sharply her teacup rattled in its saucer. James noticed these Changes but didn't press. He'd always believed marriage meant giving each other room, and Clara's warmth returned within days, her laughter filling the house as she told stories about her students or planned their next hike. In 1980, another trip. This time Clara's explanation was vaguer. "Family business," she said, her hands twisting a dish towel as she spoke, voice over dinner. "Laura needs me to sort some things out." She packed her small suitcase, kissed James goodbye with a tighter-than-usual hug, and returned with a set of Atlanta-themed coasters, her eyes shadowed for a week before she settled back into herself. These trips became a rhythm in their life, like seasons changing. 1985 brought another, then 1989. Each time, Clara returned with a gift, a tie clip, a bag of pecan pralines, and a brief period of watchfulness that faded like morning mist. James trusted her, but the pattern gnawed at him, a quiet question he couldn't quite voice. Why did she never talk about Laura beyond vague updates? Why did she seem so guarded after each trip, as if carrying a weight she couldn't share? In 1982, their life faced another test. Clara had been feeling unwell for weeks, fatigue, nausea, a persistent ache in her side. A visit to the doctor revealed gallstones, requiring surgery. The procedure was routine, but the hospital stay rattled Clara more than James expected. She insisted on handling the insurance paperwork herself, her hands trembling as she filled out forms. "Just want to make sure it's right," she said, her voice tight. James nodded, assuming it was stress, but he noticed how she avoided letting the hospital staff photograph her for their records, citing privacy concerns. After the surgery, Clara recovered quickly, her energy returning as she dove back into teaching. But the experience lingered in James's mind. She'd always been private, never wanting their photo in the local paper after James's firm was featured in a 1983 article, declining invitations to events where photographers might be present. He chalked it up to shyness, but it added to the quiet mystery of her Atlanta trips. Their inability to have children remained a tender wound. In 1977, after 3 years of hoping, they'd tried fertility treatments, only to face the same heartbreaking news. Clara's grief was deep, her silence heavy for weeks. James tried to comfort her, suggesting adoption again, but Clara's response was the same. Maybe someday. Her hesitation puzzled him. She loved children, poured her heart into her classroom, yet seemed to shy away from the legal scrutiny adoption would bring. James didn't push, but the question lingered like a shadow. Instead, Clara channeled her love into her students. She created story corners where kids could read in cozy nooks, and she spent evenings crafting personalized learning aids, a picture book for a boy who loved trains, a math game for a girl who struggled with numbers. Parents called her a miracle worker, and James swelled with pride when he overheard them at school events. "Your wife's a gift," one mother told him at a 1984 open house. "My son was terrified of school. Now he can't wait to go. She's got a way with them," James said, his chest tight with love. At home, he'd watch Clara cut out construction paper stars for her class, her focus absolute, and think, "She's the best person I know." By 1987, Carter Financial Services had grown, with 3 employees and a steady client base. James's careful work earned him a reputation as Asheville's most reliable accountant, and he took pride in helping small businesses thrive. Clara, too, was recognized, named Teacher of the Year in 1986, her classroom a model for the district. Their bungalow became a hub for the community. Mrs. Parker, their neighbor, brought over peach cobbler for no reason at all, and Tom and Betty hosted barbecues where Clara's pies were the star. The couple's life was woven into the fabric of Magnolia Lane, their home a place of laughter and warmth. But the trips to Atlanta continued. In 1989, Clara received a phone call one evening, her face paling as she listened. She turned away from James, her voice low, her shoulders tense. "I need to go to Atlanta again," she said over dinner, her eyes avoiding his. "Laura's having a rough time. It's urgent." "Is she okay?" James asked, concern creasing his brow. He'd never met Laura, never even seen a photo, though Clara mentioned her occasionally. A cousin living alone in a downtown apartment. Private and sickly. "She will be," Clara said, her voice steady, but her hands fidgeting with her napkin. "I'll be back in 4 days." James drove her to the bus station, the early morning air sharp with autumn chill. Clara hugged him fiercely, her cheek pressed against his. "I love you, James," she whispered. "Always." When she returned, she brought a small music box, its tune a soft rendition of "Georgia on My Mind." For a week, she was different, jumping, at the sound of a neighbor's car door, checking the locks obsessively, watching passers-by on Magnolia Lane with a guarded gaze. James noticed but said nothing, his trust in her outweighing his curiosity. By the next week, she was baking pies again, her laughter bright as she told him about a student who'd drawn her as a superhero in a class project. In 1990, James was cleaning the attic, sorting through old tax records and dusty boxes of Clara's teaching supplies. Tucked under the eaves, he found a small metal box, its surface scratched but sturdy, secured with a padlock. It was heavy, as if packed with papers, and its presence startled him. Clara was meticulous about their home, yet she'd never mentioned this. Over dinner, he brought it up casually. "Found a locked box in the attic today," he said, slicing into a roast chicken Clara had made. "Old keepsakes?" Clara's fork paused midair, her eyes flickering with something, fear maybe, or surprise. "Oh, that," she said, her voice too light. "Just some old papers, nothing important." Her hands trembled slightly as she served another slice of chicken, and James caught the motion but didn't comment. "Want me to move it somewhere easier to get to?" he offered, keeping his tone neutral. "No," Clara said quickly, then softened. "No, thank you, James. It's fine where it is." That night, as James lay in bed, he heard Clara's footsteps in the attic, soft but deliberate. The creak of the floorboards stopped near where he'd found the box, and he wondered what was inside that made her so protective. He didn't ask. Trust, he reminded himself, was the foundation of their marriage. If Clara needed to keep something private, he'd respect that. The 1990s brought more milestones. James's firm grew, adding a 4th employee and a bigger office on College Street. Clara was named Teacher of the Year again in 1994. Her innovative methods, like using music to teach counting, studied by other educators. Their home on Magnolia Lane was a gathering place, with summer barbecues and winter potlucks. Clara remembered every neighbor's birthday, dropping off homemade cookies or pies, and James helped Mrs. Parker with her taxes each April, earning her gratitude and a steady supply of cobbler. Their life was comfortable, filled with small joys. They took summer trips to the Carolina coast, collecting shells and building sandcastles like kids. They danced in their living room to jazz records, Clara's head resting on James's shoulder as Miles Davis's trumpet filled the air. James often watched Clara as she read or gardened, marveling that this vibrant, kind woman had chosen him. "I'm the lucky one," he told Tom one evening over beers, the stars bright above their backyard. But Clara's trips to Atlanta persisted. In 1995, she went again, her explanation brief. "Laura's getting older. She needs help with some things." She returned with a book of Atlanta history, her eyes shadowed for days. James noticed her checking the mailbox daily, as if expecting something urgent, but she never spoke of it. The pattern was familiar now, yet it left a quiet ache in James's chest. Why did Laura never call except before these trips? Why had he never met her? One evening, as they sat on the porch swing listening to a folk record, James asked, "How's Laura doing? You haven't mentioned her lately." Clara's hand froze around her glass of iced tea. "She's fine," she said, her voice careful. "Just aging, like us." "In all these years, I've never met her," James said, keeping his tone light. "Maybe we could both visit Atlanta sometime." Clara set her glass down, her fingers brushing the rim. "Laura's private. Doesn't like new people." After a pause, she added, "Besides, those trips are my little escapes. Every marriage needs a bit of space, don't you think?" James nodded, though her tone sparked a flicker of curiosity. In 25 years, he'd never seen a photo of Laura, never heard her voice. The locked box in the attic loomed in his mind, but he pushed it aside. Clara's love was unquestionable, her warmth, her laughter, the way she made their life a home. Whatever she kept private, he trusted it wasn't meant to hurt him. The new millennium brought a quiet rhythm to James and Clara Carter's life on Magnolia Lane. By 2000, their bungalow was a tapestry of memories, walls adorned with Clara's watercolor sketches of mountain trails, a shelf displaying James's, vintage coins, and a garden bursting with roses that neighbors admired each spring. At 55, James's accounting firm, Carter Financial Services, had become a cornerstone of Asheville's small business community, its modest office bustling with clients. Clara, 53, remained a beloved kindergarten teacher at Hillcrest Elementary, her classroom a haven of finger-painted art and cozy reading nooks. Their life was a mosaic of routine joys: Sunday church, summer hikes along the Blue Ridge Parkway, and evenings on the porch swing, jazz records humming through the open window. Yet the shadow of Clara's trips to Atlanta lingered. In 2001, she announced another visit, her voice soft over breakfast. "Laura's not doing well," she said, stirring her tea. "I need to check on her." James nodded, accustomed to the pattern, though the vagueness of her explanation, a cousin he'd never met, a life she never detailed, stirred a quiet unease. He drove her to the bus station, the September air crisp, and she returned a week later with a small Atlanta Braves cap, a playful gift for James, who wasn't much of a sports fan. "Thought it might look good on you," she teased. But her eyes held a familiar guardedness, her hands checking the locks twice before bed. For days after each trip, 2001, 2005, 2008, Clara was different. She'd watch the street from their kitchen window, her gaze lingering on passing cars, or startle at the sound of the doorbell. James noticed but held his questions, trusting her silence was a private space she needed. By the time she returned, to her warm, laughing self, baking pies for neighbors or planning lessons, he'd convince himself it was nothing, a quirk of travel, a worry for her cousin. But the locked metal box in the attic, untouched since he'd found it in 1990, remained, a silent question mark in his mind. In 2010, Clara's final trip to Atlanta came abruptly. A phone call interrupted their dinner, her face paling as she listened. She turned away, speaking in hushed tones, her shoulders tense. "I have to go," she told James later, her voice steady, but her eyes distant. "Laura's in trouble. It's urgent." "How long this time?" James asked, concern creasing his brow. At 70, he moved slower, his knees stiff from years of hiking. But his love for Clara was as steady as ever. 4 days, she said, packing her suitcase with practiced efficiency. "I'll be back before you miss me." When she returned, Clara seemed lighter, almost relieved. She brought a carved wooden bookmark, its edge etched with a peach tree, and for the first time, her post-trip watchfulness was brief, fading within a day. "Laura's doing better," she said, unprompted, as they sat on the porch swing. "I don't think I'll need to go back anytime soon." James smiled, squeezing her hand. "Good. I like having you here." He didn't ask why her trips had stopped, grateful for the change but unaware of its weight. Clara's secret, buried for decades, seemed to loosen its grip, though she still carried it silently. The years rolled on, their life a gentle cadence of love and community. By 2015, James had semi-retired, passing most of Carter Financial Services to a younger partner, but keeping a few clients for the joy of it. Clara retired from teaching at 68, her classroom farewell marked by a flood of cards from former students, some now parents themselves. They spent more time in their garden, Clara tending her roses while James read mysteries on the porch. Neighbors still flocked to their home. Mrs. Parker, now frail but sharp-witted, brought stories of Asheville's past, and Tom and Betty hosted summer barbecues where Clara's pies stole the show. Their marriage, now in its 5th decade, was a quiet marvel. James looked at Clara, her chestnut hair now silver, her eyes still bright, and felt a gratitude that deepened with age. She'd laugh at his bad puns, hold his hand during church, and listen as he recounted dreams of a cross-country road trip they'd never taken. Clara, in turn, found comfort in James's steadiness, his unwavering kindness. Yet the locked box in the attic remained, its contents a mystery James respected but never forgot. In 2020, they celebrated their 50th anniversary in their backyard, pandemic restrictions keeping the guest list small. Tom, Betty, and a few neighbors stood at a distance, raising glasses of sparkling cider. "To James and Clara," Tom toasted, his voice thick. "You two make the rest of us believe in forever." Clara squeezed James's hand, her eyes misty. At 80 and 78, they'd grown old together, their love weathered but strong. James walked with a cane now, his knees protesting, and Clara's hands trembled slightly from arthritis, but they still danced to Pete Seeger in their living room, slow and careful. In October 2025, James began feeling unusually tired. He blamed it on age, the chill of autumn. But when he struggled to climb the stairs to their bedroom, Clara insisted he see a doctor. "It's nothing," he said, shrugging on his coat for the appointment at Asheville Medical Center. Just an old man slowing down. 3 days later, the doctor's office called. Tests showed abnormalities, and James needed to go to the hospital immediately. Within a week, the diagnosis came. Advanced lung cancer, spread to his lymph nodes. "How long?" James asked Dr. Emily Walsh, his voice steady as Clara sat beside him, her face pale. "Without treatment, a few weeks," Dr. Walsh said gently. "With aggressive treatment, perhaps a few months, but it would be grueling." James looked at Clara, her eyes brimming with tears. "I've had a good life," he said. "I'd rather have a few good weeks than months of pain." Clara nodded, her hand tight in his. She didn't argue, knowing his heart as well as her own. James was admitted to the hospital 2 weeks later, his condition worsening rapidly. Clara stayed by his side, reading from his favorite Dashiell Hammett novels or holding his hand as he dozed. The nurses grew fond of her, bringing her coffee and sandwiches, urging her to rest. "You're a saint, Mrs. Carter," one said, but Clara shook her head, her focus on James. On the 4th day, a new nurse, Sarah Mitchell, entered the room. She was in her 60s, with short gray hair and kind eyes behind thick glasses. As she checked James's IV, she glanced at Clara, her brow furrowing. "Clara? No, that's not right. Lillian Brooks? From that teaching workshop in Atlanta back in the 70s? Clara's face went white. "I'm Clara Carter," she said quietly. "James's wife." Sarah frowned, confused. "I'm sorry. You look so much like her. We trained together at a conference in '68. Lillian Brooks, right? From Atlanta?" James, half dozing, stirred. "What's that about Atlanta?" "Nothing, dear," Clara said quickly, her voice tight. "Just a mix-up." Sarah apologized and left, but James's eyes lingered on Clara, a question forming in his weakened mind. The next day, a hospital administrator visited to confirm insurance details. "Mr. Carter, there's a discrepancy with your wife's Social Security number," he said, tapping his tablet. "The number she gave doesn't match our records from a visit in 1988. "That was her gallbladder surgery, 1982, James said, confused. "She's only been here once." The administrator shook his head. "We have a Lillian Brooks, same birth date, treated here in 1988. The photo's similar, but the Social Security numbers don't match." When Clara returned from speaking with Dr. Walsh, James watched her closely. 55 years of marriage had taught him her tells, the way her lips tightened, the quick glance away. "The administrator mentioned a Lillian Brooks," he said, his voice soft but firm. "Said you might be her." Clara's hands froze on her purse. "It's a mistake," she said, her tone too even. "Hospitals mix up records all the time." That night, as Clara slept in the chair beside his bed, James lay awake, the heart monitor beeping steadily. For the first time, he wondered if he truly knew the woman he'd loved for over half a century. The trips to Atlanta, the locked box, her aversion to photos, it all swirled in his mind, a puzzle he'd never tried to solve. The next morning, Clara arranged a vase of daisies sent by Mrs. Parker, her movements precise, but her eyes darting to the door with every passing footstep. James watched, his chest heavy. "Clara," he said softly, "we need to talk." She set the vase down, her shoulders sagging. For a moment she seemed ready to deflect, but then she nodded. "Yes." she whispered, pulling her chair close. I suppose we do. James raised his bed slightly, wincing at the effort. Who's Lillian Brooks? Clara closed the hospital room door, her hands trembling as she sat. I was born Lillian Brooks in 1942 in Atlanta, she began, her voice barely audible. Not Clara Evans from Charlotte. James's heart thudded, the monitor's beep, quickening. The woman he'd shared his life with was a stranger. Why lie? Your name? Your hometown? Why? Clara twisted her wedding ring, her eyes fixed on it. Because I was running. She explained that at 24, she'd married Daniel Harper, a charming man whose family held sway in Atlanta's political circles. After their wedding, he changed, controlling her clothes, her friends, her every move. When she disobeyed, he hit her. The first time I thought it was a mistake, she said, her voice steadier now. By the third, I knew he'd never stop. James reached for her hand, his eyes filling. Why not divorce him? It was 1968, Clara said, her laugh bitter. Divorce was a scandal, and Daniel's father was a city councilman. No one believed me. Not the police, not my family. He told everyone I was unstable. After a beating that left her with a broken wrist, a social worker at the hospital gave her a name. A man who created new identities for women escaping abuse. It cost everything I'd saved, Clara said, but it gave me Clara Evans. She fled to Asheville, changing buses to avoid being tracked, choosing the city for its distance and the last of her money. The trips to Atlanta weren't to see a cousin. They were to meet her contact, a private investigator named Ellen, who kept tabs on Daniel. I had to know if he was looking for me, Clara said. If he'd moved on. The locked box, she confessed, held her past. Her birth certificate as Lillian Brooks, her marriage license to Daniel, hospital records of her injuries, letters from Ellen tracking Daniel's life. He remarried in 1971, she said. But he asked about me for years. Ellen warned me to stay hidden. James's mind raced, memories shifting. Clara's flinch at police sirens, her refusal to be photographed, her hesitation about adoption. It all made sense. The box, he said. What's in it? My truth, Clara whispered. Everything I couldn't destroy but had to hide. Why tell me now? James asked, his voice breaking. Clara's eyes met his, tears spilling. My last trip in 2010 was for Daniel's funeral. He died of a stroke. I was free. But I wasn't. Not really. I was still lying to you. She took his hands. I was afraid you'd see our marriage as a lie. I'm still afraid. The room was silent save for the monitor's steady beep. James looked at Clara, Lillian, the woman who'd been his home for 55 years. Was it a lie? He asked. Clara's voice trembled. My name was a lie, my past was hidden. But every moment with you, every promise, those were real. I loved you from that first morning in the diner. That's the truest thing about me. James closed his eyes, the weight of her words settling. I need time, he said quietly. This is a lot. Clara nodded, wiping her tears. I'll get coffee. Take all the time you need. Alone, James stared at the ceiling, his mind sifting through decades. The Atlanta trips, the locked box, her guarded moments, they weren't betrayals but scars of a life she'd escaped. A knock interrupted his thoughts. Dr. Walsh entered, her face grave. The cancer's spreading faster than we thought, she said. A week, maybe less. After she left, James made a decision. He pressed the call button. Could you ask my wife to bring a metal box from our attic when she returns? He told the nurse. She'll know what I mean. When Clara returned, carrying the scratched metal box, her hands shook. You asked for this? She said, placing it on the bedside table. James nodded. I want to see it. Clara unlocked the box with a key from her purse, lifting the lid to reveal yellowed papers, a faded photograph, and letters in plastic sleeves. She handed him her birth certificate, Lillian Elizabeth Brooks, born April 15, 1942, Atlanta, Georgia. Next, a marriage license to Daniel Harper, dated 1966. Hospital records followed, detailing a broken wrist, bruises, a concussion. Patient claims she fell, one note read. A black and white photo showed a young Lillian, her lip swollen, her eye darkened. James's hands trembled. He did this? Clara nodded, silent. A 1968 Atlanta Journal clipping described Lillian Brooks's disappearance, her distraught husband claiming she'd been kidnapped. Letters from Ellen, dated every few years, tracked Daniel's life. His remarriage, his questions about Lillian, his death in 2010. The final letter, signed Ellen, read, DH past 3:10:10. You're free. James returned the items to the box, his heart heavy. All these years you lived in fear. Not of you, Clara said, taking his hand. Never of you. I was afraid of losing you. The next morning, James asked the nurses for a favor. By afternoon, the hospital room was transformed. A vase of daisies and roses on the windowsill, a portable speaker playing Pete Seeger's Turn, Turn, Turn. Clara entered, confused. What's this? James, sitting up in a clean gown, his hair combed, looked stronger than he had in days. I married Clara Evans 55 years ago. Today, I want to make a promise to Lillian Brooks. Clara's hand flew to her mouth. You still want me? Always, James said. The chaplain's coming. I thought we'd renew our vows. No secrets this time. Tears streamed down Clara's face as the chaplain, a kind woman with silver hair, arrived with two nurses as witnesses. They held hands across the hospital bed, repeating their 1970 vows. I, James Carter, take you, Lillian Brooks, also known as Clara Carter, to be my wife today and every day we have left, James said, his voice strong. I, Lillian Brooks, take you, James Carter, to be my husband with no more secrets, Clara said. Sobbing softly, the small audience clapped, and the chaplain blessed them. Alone again, James said, one more thing. He dialed his lawyer, Richard. I need to update my will. It's urgent. Come to the hospital this afternoon. After hanging up, he explained to Clara. Your legal identity. If something happens to me, the house, the accounts, my pension could be a problem. I'm fixing it. Clara kissed him gently. You're still protecting me. Always will, James said, his smile weak but warm. 3 days after James and Clara renewed their vows in the hospital room, James Carter's strength began to fade. The cancer, relentless, sapped his energy, leaving him pale against the white sheets of Asheville Medical Center. Clara stayed by his side, her silver hair pulled back, her hand steady despite the ache in her heart. She read to him from the Maltese Falcon, her voice soft but clear, pausing when his breathing grew labored. When he slept, she held his hand, her thumb tracing the familiar lines of his knuckles, memorizing the weight of his fingers in hers. On the evening of October 28, 2025, James opened his eyes, his gaze clearer than it had been in days. Clara leaned close, setting the book aside. Hey you, she said, her smile trembling. Feeling better? James's lips curved faintly. Just wanted to see you one more time. His voice was a whisper, but it carried the warmth of 55 years. Lillian, Clara, doesn't matter what I call you, you're my home. Tears spilled down Clara's cheeks. And you're mine, James. Always. He squeezed her hand, his grip weak but deliberate. Don't be afraid anymore. You're free. Clara nodded, unable to speak. She leaned forward, kissing his forehead, her lips lingering against his skin. James's breathing slowed, each exhale softer until it stopped altogether. The heart monitor's steady beep flatlined, a piercing sound in the quiet room. Clara didn't move, didn't call the nurse. She sat, holding his hand, letting the weight of their life together settle around her. The diner where they met, the porch swing they'd built, the roses they'd planted, the love that had carried them through decades. Finally, she pressed the call button. Goodbye, my love, she whispered, kissing his forehead one last time. The nurses arrived, their faces gentle with understanding. They turned off the monitor, gave Clara time alone. She sat for nearly an hour, the hospital room a cocoon of memories. James's glasses rested on the bedside table, next to the vase of daisies and roses from their vow renewal. The portable speaker, now silent, had played their song just days ago. Clara touched the metal box, still on the table, its contents no longer a secret. She felt unmoored, yet anchored by the truth they'd shared at the end. The funeral was held on a crisp Tuesday, November 4th, 2025, exactly 1 week after James learned Clara's true identity. The small Methodist church on Haywood Street was filled with familiar faces, neighbors from Magnolia Lane, former clients of Carter Financial Services, parents of Clara's long-ago students. The wooden casket was draped in white lilies, James's favorite flower after the sunflowers Clara planted each summer. Clara wore a simple black dress, her silver hair pinned up, her eyes red but steady. Tom Reynolds, James's oldest friend, spoke first, his voice thick with emotion. James Carter was the kind of man who made you want to be better, he said, gripping the podium. He loved this town, his work, his friends, but most of all, he loved Clara. You could see it in the way he looked at her, like she was the only person in the room. Mrs. Helen Parker, now 90 and frail, stood with help from her grandson. James helped me with my taxes every year. Never asked for a dime, she said, her voice quavering. And Clara brought me pies when I was too old to bake. They were family to all of us. When it was Clara's turn, she approached the podium, her hands clutching a folded piece of paper. She looked out at the sea of faces, people who'd known her as Clara Carter, the teacher, the neighbor, the friend. Only a few knew the name Lillian Brooks, and fewer still the weight it carried. James Carter was the best man I ever knew, she began, her voice clear despite the ache in her chest. He taught me what love means, not just in words, but in actions, every day for 55 years. She paused, glancing at the casket. In our final days, he showed me what true acceptance looks like. He reminded me that love isn't about perfect people. It's about perfectly accepting each other, flaws, secrets, and all. The congregation was silent, some wiping tears. Clara's eyes lingered on Tom, who nodded slightly, his expression knowing. She didn't share her past, didn't need to. James had loved her through it, and that was enough. After the service, friends gathered at the bungalow on Magnolia Lane. The kitchen table overflowed with casseroles, pies, and stories. Neighbors recounted James's quiet kindness, shoveling snow for Mrs. Parker, helping a local diner balance its books during tough times. Clara moved through the crowd, accepting hugs and condolences, her smile warm, but her heart heavy. Tom stayed late, helping clear plates as the last guests left. At the door he paused, his eyes soft. James told me, about your past. Clara froze, her hand on the doorknob. He did? Called me from the hospital, Tom said. Asked me to look out for you. Said you might need a friend. Who knows the whole truth? Clara's throat tightened. Even in his final days, James had been protecting her. Thank you, she whispered. Does it change how you see me? Tom shook his head. You're still Clara, the woman who makes the best apple pie in Asheville. But if you ever want to be Lillian, I'm here. She considered his words. I've been Clara longer than I was Lillian. It's who I am now. Tom nodded, pulling her into a hug. James knew that. He loved you for it. 3 months later, in February 2026, Clara received a letter from James's lawyer, Richard. Inside was a legal document, meticulously drafted, detailing her true identity as Lillian Brooks and the circumstances of her escape from Atlanta. A handwritten note from James accompanied it, his familiar scrawl bringing tears to her eyes. My dearest Clara, if you're reading this, I'm gone, but you gave me a gift in our final days, the truth. Now I'm giving you something in return, freedom from fear. This document ensures your story is protected, whether you need it for legal reasons or just to feel whole. You've lived in the shadows too long. Don't hide anymore unless it's your choice. I love you, always. James. Clara clutched the letter, her heart swelling. James had seen her, Lillian, Clara, all of her, and loved her still. The document was his final act of care, ensuring her false identity wouldn't jeopardize their home, their savings, his pension. She called Richard the next day, confirming the paperwork was filed, her future secure. In the spring, Clara returned. To her garden, the roses budding under her careful hands. She planted a row of sunflowers along the fence, their bright faces a tribute to James, who'd loved their cheerful resilience. As she worked the soil, she thought about identity, how Lillian Brooks had been born of fear, how Clara Evans had been created out of necessity, and how Clara Carter had become real through love and time. Lillian was a ghost, but she was also the foundation of everything Clara had become. One sunny afternoon, while deadheading roses, Clara made a decision. She called Tom, her voice firm. "I need your help with something. I want to start a fund at the women's shelter downtown for women who need to start over like I did." "That's a hell of an idea," Tom said, his enthusiasm clear through the phone. "What do you want to call it?" Clara smiled, glancing at the wedding photo on the mantel. Her and James, young and hopeful, the diner's glow behind them. "The Second Chance Scholars Fund," she said, "because sometimes the end of one story is just the beginning of another." Tom agreed to help, connecting her with the shelter's director. Clara used a portion of their savings, along with donations from neighbors and former clients, to establish the fund. It would provide scholarships for women escaping abuse, covering education, job training, or new identities, whatever they needed to rebuild. She worked with the shelter to ensure the fund's structure, her teaching experience guiding her to create something lasting. On the day the fund launched, Clara stood at the shelter's small community room, a plaque on the wall reading "Second Chance Scholars." A handful of women attended, some with wary eyes, others with tentative hope. Clara spoke briefly, her voice steady. "This is for new beginnings," she said, "for believing you can be more than your past." Afterward, a young woman approached, her hands fidgeting. "I'm starting over," she said quietly. "New name, new city. It's scary." Clara took her hand, her eyes kind. "It is. But you're stronger than you know. You'll find your way." As summer bloomed, Clara sat on the porch swing, a glass of iced tea in hand. The sunflowers stood tall, their golden petals catching the light. She looked at the wedding photo, now joined by a smaller frame, a black and white image of Lillian Brooks, young and bruised but defiant, pulled from the metal box. Clara had placed it there not to dwell on pain, but to honor the courage it took to become someone new. In revealing her secret, she'd discovered a truth James had always known. Their love was stronger than names or pasts. It was built on quiet mornings in the diner, evenings in the garden, decades of shared laughter and tears. James's final gift, freedom from fear, had given her the courage to live fully as Clara and to help others do the same. Clara sipped her tea, the swing creaking softly. The air carried the scent of roses and sunflowers, and for the first time in decades, she felt unburdened. "Thank you, James," she whispered, her eyes on the horizon, "for seeing me."